so I'm just gonna redo it again. Hopefully that'll work it out. All right. So we should be live streaming now. Um, and sorry if people were watching and then I dropped, my bad. But I just wanted to make sure that we were broadcasting in the places that I wanted to broadcast. Okay. So, welcome. This is the face of this Thursday's RNDP study slash Harriet Stoddard study. And today's study, we are going to be talking about an analysis that I wrote around the labor capacity of African women, and reading through that analysis, a piece that was actually also published in the um, the Burning Spear newspaper. So for those who may not know or may not be as familiar with me as they are with Matsamela, my name is Yejide Orunmila. I am the president of the African National Women's Organization. I lead that and have been leading that since 2015. Um, and since then, I've been immersed in the conditions and contradictions in the life and environment of African women, not just in the US, but all over the world, and how the impact of colonial capitalism has the toll that the colonial capitalism has had on African women in many various different ways. In our organization, one of our main campaigns is the Arrest CPS campaign, which cuts at the core of um, capitalism itself. It still exposes the kidnapping of African human beings, the criminalization of African women and African fathers, and the destruction of the African family. So we believe that that campaign or that issue of child protective services is really a counterinsurgency attack on the African community, masquerading as an altruistic sort of institution of colonialism to resolve or help us figure out our familial issues that come as a result of colonial capitalism. So that's one of our main campaigns, and a lot of what I talk about comes from a place of experience. So many may know me as Yejide is the president of the African National Women's Organization, but I have and have always been the African working class, and single parent for 18 years of a girl, hustled, had to really, make decisions around myself, my finances, my body, based on being a single African woman underneath colonial capitalism. So when I write or when I discuss or when I provide analysis, it's coming from this place. Um, and yeah, so I just wanted to say that. So I'm going to open up with some slides that I created to help guide us through the study. And again, I'm going to be calling on folks to help me read, or just read through, because I plan not to read. I want the folks in the study to read. Um, just read through the piece. We're going to cut it into two parts. It's 4 pages, and you all should have had a link to it. If you don't have the link to the document, then just let us know. Matsamela is helping on the back end. I'm screen sharing, so I can't see the chat right now. So if someone does not have it, please share the link. And yeah, so the piece I wrote is called The Global Exploitation and Revolutionary Potential of African Women's Labor. In this study, we're going to discuss how African women's labor powers the global economy and how that same power can be transformed into a revolutionary force to overturn colonial capitalism. And I think it's I wanted to talk about this because, oh, first, I got a reason. Okay, let me go back to the slides. Okay. So AMWO, African National Women's Organization, is an organization that was founded by the African People's Socialist Party to uh, to recruit and African women into revolutionary political life and really explain the world from an African woman's perspective using African internationalism because, the primary thing that women's movements, gender activists focus on is this idea of patriarchy, this contradiction, this symptom of patriarchy as the primary issue that is confronting women. And African internationalism tells us that it is the primary contradiction is colonialism itself, and patriarchy is a symptom of that. So you can't remove patriarchy and maintain capitalism, colonial capitalism. You got to destroy colonial capitalism to get rid of the patriarchy. And so AMWO was formed by the African People's Socialist Party with this African internationalist understanding. And, we are anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, revolutionary, membership-based African women's organization that organize locally in the United States, nationally, um, locally in our city, nationally around the United States, internationally, wherever we may find ourselves and have members, and that we organize to confront and contend with and destroy the special oppression that we may feel as a result of being colonially dominated and within the borders of the United States. And I'm Yejide once again. We are calling for folks during this broadcast to donate or contribute resources. We are raising $100, which helps us support the campaign, the Hands Off Uhuru campaign, and helping our comrades pay for the lawyers that they need in order to fight or go into the appeal process. So AMWO is contributing to that. So we would appreciate it if folks are able to donate during this period. Our goal for this evening is $100. You can do so by going directly to our website, amwoohuru.org/donate, or you can Zelle us. We do not have a Cash App. Cash App shut us down. They said U Square. So next best thing we can ask people to do is to go to Zelle. And our Zelle email is info@amwoohuru.org. Whatever's easiest for you, please use that. And we appreciate anything that you're able to contribute during this broadcast. We also want to share with you that another way for to support economically is to head on over to our shop on our website, amwoohuru.org/storefront. We have very attractive products that help us overall meet our economic and development goals throughout the year. We just at the beginning of the year created a shirt that was dedicated to African women veterans of various different struggles across time and space. And we are very proud of that design, and we hope that you are able to purchase that. But we also have other things. We have mugs, we have fanny packs, bags, socks, hoodies, sweaters, things like that you can definitely contribute to your wardrobe. So go to amwoohuru.org/storefront. I still have not gotten my Veterans Tee, but I'm going to get my Veterans Tee before Veterans Day. Memorial Day just passed. Okay, so there's some other sort of colonial holiday that I want to make sure that I have my Veterans Tee on for. So I'm going to get that. And then, of course, if you don't know, please go ahead and place your order with thecolonnades.com. The Colonnades is indigenously rooted skincare brand that was created by the African National Women's Organization. I am its mixtress. I create mostly all of the products in my workshop that you cannot see beyond my screen. But all of these products are are beneficial for your skin and your hair. And we use naturally sourced ingredients. We don't include any sort of artificial ingredients in our products. So we want to keep it as pure as it possibly can, to respect and honor the ingredient that's already in it, and to say that we can use the things that our people have always used to treat our skin, to soften our skin, to clarify any issues. And so the Colonnades is that brand. It also highlights um, our revolutionaries on our labels. So if you'll turn around on some of these jars, you'll see faces of Amilcar Cabral, chairman of Marley Shatella, owners of Naya Shatella, Asada Shakur, and quotes that are also included on these as well. So it's a uses a political education tool as well as decolonizing your skincare routine. You're going to be decolonizing your mind when you use Decolonase. So head on over to decolonase.com and take a gander and take a look and purchase something if you are able to. So again, this study is the global exploitation and revolutionary capacity of African women. Um, the reason what prompted me to write this piece was being introduced to Claudia Jones and a piece that she wrote, which was an end to the neglect of the problems of Negro women. I found it um, I found it very enlightening because this has been the only piece that I've come across, and I haven't searched really hard, so there may be other things that contextualize the question of African women in our labor. But this was like the earliest piece that I was able to see of a Black woman who identified as a communist, um, talking about the labor power of African women, and more than just talking about it, static like creating and writing about it and gathering stats about how much, if the Communist Party, she was the piece she wrote was because she wanted the Communist Party to take seriously that they need to organize this sector of the American population because they were the most oppressed, and they, if you organize this sector, then everybody else would be uplifted through the struggles that they are involved in, on many different fronts. So African women at the time uh, represented a majority of household and domestic work in the United States, and were also the main caregivers of children, of their own children, and of other people. And so she, quantified that and gave that like numbers inside this piece of work, and I thought that was really great. And this was written like in 1949. um and I don't think that she was successful in winning the Communist Party to organizing us, but it was successful in helping me understand like the way that we have to look at the capacity of African women, not only as just as in the sense of a gendered half of the African nation, but what our labor contributes to the economic stability of colonial capitalism, and what it has been, and not saying that we're doing that willingly, but how the system itself forces and wrenches and squeezes out of us this economic squeezes out of us this our labor um, in many different ways. So there's a little bit about Claudia on the screen. She was born in Trinidad and Tobago. Her family immigrated to the United States as a child, and she became an activist and radicalized here in the United States. She was, because of the times in the United States, she was then, what's the word? Kicked out of the United States. Um, and she also feared for her life because at the time she was involved in the Scottsboro Boys case, and there was a crunch down in the United States around communism and communists. So she ended up in the UK where she founded these periodicals, a newspaper, the West Indian Gazette, and she organized Caribbean carnivals, which ended up being one of the largest Caribbean carnivals in the world at the time, and is now the second largest according to this. Um, so, but she founded that carnival as a way to to combat the racial violence that was happening in the UK. The Caribbean community, African community in the UK was dealing with, you know, Nazi white skinheads, coming to our communities, destroying our properties, and destroying our communities and our people, creating violence. So these carnivals were a way to not hide, but to represent our pride and who we are, and really was a mode of resistance, as opposed to how we understand carnivals today, which is, joviality and celebration. It was a celebration as well then, but it was also a mode of resistance as well. Everything that she did was about resistance. So just a little bit about her. So the analysis I wrote, that we're about to read in a few, it's about looking at the labor capacity of women. African women form the backbones of economies in many different ways. The piece I wrote also not only talks about us in some sort of like domesticated field worker capacity, but it looks at all of the ways that Black women, African women contribute our labor. Um, so in office spaces, in different places, in the field, however we enter the economy as laborers and as contributors to a GDP of something. My goal with the article was to kind of look at the informal and formal sectors, and not other ourselves. Um, Oftentimes when somebody from the US can talk about African people, but only look at like the desperate, sort of conditions that may exist in other places in the world, I wanted to make sure that we were included in that, and looking at how labor may be different the way that it's contextualized here, but it's all labor, and everything that we do to make money is labor, and that also contributes to the GDP of something. And despite whether you're in the field or in the office, you know, you know, your labor contributes to it all, like the sustainability of colonial capitalism. And I'll just say this, like I used to work in a accounting firm, and mostly all of the administrative staff, mostly all, were Black women. Like if we were to leave, like that place was shut down because people didn't know how to get things done without us. So I just want us to think about it in that way too. So again, I asked for folks to help with reading. So MQ, if you can help us by beginning, and I'll reading the first section, and then at the history of stolen labor, we'll have somebody else read. And please put your willingness to read in the chat. So MQ, if you can get us started, that would be great.
The global exploitation, revolutionary potential of African women's labor by Yejide Orunmila. Worldwide, African women form the backbone of economies. We work fields, take care of children that are not our own, clean homes we do not live in, sell produce in crowded marketplaces, care for entire communities, and raise future generations in the centers of colonial oppression. Our labor, whether paid, unpaid, or underpaid, has been systemically extracted to build the wealth of the colonizers and sustain the parasitic capitalist system. The contributions of African women to the global economy are massive. In Africa, women are responsible for producing up to 70% of food and participating in 90% of the informal economy, a sector largely unregulated and hyperexploited. Yet this labor, which holds up entire nations, remains largely uncounted in gross domestic product (GDP) estimations, the total value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders during a specific period, because it exists beyond the reach of state and capitalist control. Meanwhile, in the United States, African mothers represent the most exploited and lowest paid segment of working women, disproportionately concentrated in domestic work, healthcare assistance, retail, and other undervalued service sectors. These are the same jobs that became essential during the COVID-19 pandemic, revealing how central our labor is. Or should I go on? Or?
Oh, Comrade Yejide, you're muted.
I was calling Jamal. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted. Jamal, you said you could read next.
Oh, comrades, thank you. And just up to the next section, correct?
Yeah, you can read, yes, to the next section.
Okay. A history of stolen labor. From the first attack on Africa, which resulted in the capture and enslavement of African people, to colonial regimes that coerced African women into cash crop economies, our labor has always been central to capitalist expansion. The enslaved African woman's reproductive capacity and agricultural knowledge were both commodified under slavery. She became both laborer and labor producer, bearing children who would be born into bondage, fueling future generations of capitalist profit. After enslavement, colonial and neocolonial regimes continued this parasitic relationship. Structural adjustment programs, IMF austerity measures, and free trade zones have all targeted African women's work as a site of extraction. From the fields of Africa to care work in Western Europe, African women's labor begrudgingly powers the colonial mode of production.
Thank you, comrade.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. And then let's go to the end of page 2. Um, so if you can continue, comrade, until right here, until like this section, and then we can have somebody else read. So if you can continue from informal labor, Jamal.
Uhuru. Informal labor, communal power, and the threat to capital. In Africa, the majority of women's work in, in Africa, the majority of women work in the informal economy, markets, food vending, domestic work, tailoring, farming. The lie largely outside the control of colonial state regulation. While mainstream economics and development agencies portray this sector as chaotic and in need of reform, the reality is far more complex. While the informal economy is a site of exploitation, it is also a site of resistance and survival where African women exercise self-reliance, build collective networks, and circulate money within our communities. Unlike the formal sector, which is largely regulated by parasitic policies that offer few meaningful protections, the informal sector allows for a degree of direct ownership over production and trade.
Thank you, comrade. Michelle, you said you were able to read. If you can pick up here.
Okay, yes, I could do that. It is the informal sector that we find models of cooperative economics, which is precisely why the United Nations and IMF, colonial capitalist institutions, want to disrupt it to pull African women into formal capitalist economy. Through schemes like digital banking, microloans, and mandatory business registration, they aim to dismantle the formal sector's communal power. replacing it with systems of taxation and control that insert barriers between African women and the economic systems we built for ourselves. Take African hair braiders in the US. Did you want me to continue?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
please.
Take African hair braiders in the US. For example, women who have long offered braiding services informally as a full-time livelihood or as a side hustle. Many US states require braiders to attend expensive cosmetology schools in order to open a business, even though these programs rarely teach how to care for African hair, let alone braid it. Thousands of dollars are funneled into institutions that ignore the cultural and practical realities of African women, all to receive licenses from a state that uses African labor to fatten their coffers while stripping African women from self-determination. Rather than being a problem to be fixed, the informal sector provides a blueprint for a worker-led state, one based on cooperation. It is a living example of African women's leadership in building self-reliant economies, and it holds lessons for building a truly liberated society.
Great, thank you. And if somebody can just take the last section on page 2. Erica?
Uhuru, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. The formal sector, structured exploitation in plain sight, while the informal economy is often portrayed as unstable or inefficient. The formal economy held up as the ideal of development is just as exploitative, if not more so. In fact, it is within the formal sector that the theft of African labor is legalized under colonial capitalism. Take cocoa farming in Ghana, for example. Ghana is the second largest producer of cocoa in the world. African men and women, including entire families, work long hours to harvest a commodity that generates billions of dollars annually on the global market. Yet these farmers earn a fraction of the value they create. Their wages are not set by Ghanaian workers or even the Ghanaian state, but by US and European dominated cocoa conglomerates. I've never known how to. Nestle, thank you. Mars, Ferrero, whatever, whose pricing systems are tied to the needs of the US and European economy and their own profits, not Africa's or Ghana's economy.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop here and I just want to I'm going to say a few things, but I'm going to open it up for any discussion. But what I tried to do, I think, what I tried to do here was really just give examples, right? To show, I've always been like mad at like microloans and microfinancing and how they targeted, women in the rural areas of Africa who are trying to like, are doing like animal husbandry, and they go into these deep rural sectors to say, yeah, you can get a loan from somebody in the United States for $100 and you just pay it back to this platform with interest. And I'm just like, this is so like parasitic, right? Like, and so like these women who may have otherwise found uh, a way to solve their problems, they are now being indoctrinated, captured in the web of capitalism through this loan and taxation and interest sort of thing. So there are a number of schemes that target African women, and we see it like now. If you've heard me speak about African women, and there's something called like the Uhuru Growth Fund, that basically says it's gonna, it's not from us, it's from the state. They've called it a Who Growth Fund. They're going to go into Africa somewhere and they have millions of dollars that they're going to use to, promote women and economic development on the African continent. You don't know where this money is coming from, where it's going, but apparently there's this fund that is doing this work. And even that is, we don't see any improvement from any of these schemes that they have always had to improve the lives and the conditions of African women overseas. But I also wanted to say something about like how our labor in the United States is also being, monopolized, right? How our labor is being exploited, not just in the offices, but like what we try to do in such of a gig economy is, and, I always got a side hustle because, I'm never going to not have something else that's going to give me money just in case. And I think that if we look at our families, we can always see the people around us that always got some other thing that they got going on. Somebody cut hair, somebody do nails, somebody do something. They drive Uber or something. It's we're seeing like the emergence of the gig economy because people want to do other things and have been doing other things. But even in that, going into those sort of apps, right? Like that's like the same kind of scheme, like going into the rural areas and, you know, capturing the labor potential of those people. Those gig apps are the same kind of things too. So, and I also want to recognize that African women are nearly half, if not half. I don't know the exact number because there's no global count on African women. But if you were to go to different countries and different locations and see, different communities, and they have censuses to say how many Black women to Black men ratio in those communities, you'll see these numbers start to populate that says that Black women are half or nearly half or more than half of the African population wherever they may be. And so it's not just that African women are going to hold up the other half of the sky because we're just women, but in dollars and cents, in labor and exploitation, African women are the workers. We are the ones that are working. And what the colonial capitalist society or economic conglomerates try to do is saying that because women are seen as like not equal or don't experience equity within the society, then they have these schemes that go out and try to get women to be a part of capitalism. And everything that African women have been doing from the beginning of time, I'm going to imagine, has been about self-determination. Even when I was reading the book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, they would talk about like the trade systems in Africa, pre-colonial Africa, and how, yeah, everybody was in these trade systems, but African women, in a time when women weren't allowed to go do nothing anywhere else in the world, African women were a part of these trade networks, and they would leave their families and they would go great distances to trade goods, and they were the economic breadwinners of their community. So when we look at that and then see how pre-colonial, like at the time when Africa was attacked, and all these African women who may not have traveled long distances, but still were very integral to the economic systems of their communities, their villages, their nations, are now being taken away, and those economic or reproductive capacities were now being used for the colonizers, for the people who have attacked us, and all of African people's labor was being used for that at the same time. So, like, but the piece also talked about this extra layer of the reproductive capacity, our bodies, our wombs, because they needed to produce. Like, we were actually factories, human factories that produce more laborers that could be exploited, and by hook or crook, whether it's the white slave owner or the white master on the plantation in Africa, the white master on the plantation in the United States or in the Caribbean and South America, wherever was that we were enslaved, they would make sure that we were producing children that could then be borrowed for interest, and that was a real that they if a child is not worth any money, they will just give it to another slave owner as interest on a loan until the loan can be paid. You know what I'm saying? Like these are the kinds of things that were used as tools to control, our labor and obviously ourselves capital. So I wanted to open it up to see what you all thought. I mean, I thought about that, but also thought about the piece, and then we can continue to have a conversation and read the rest of the piece. So I'm open. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'll stop sharing for right now so we can see y'all. I can see you. Don, go ahead, comrade.
President yesterday, I wanted to know how much research or how much do you know about the introduction of the gig economy, especially as it pertains to African women, right? Who, like you said, were always doing the hair braiding, the bartering services and whatnot. What would you say to maybe Africans who doubt our capacity, right? Given that legacy, Uhuru? You muted.
Am I muting myself? I feel like I am. Okay. I don't have the numbers or research associated with African people and gig economy, but I would imagine that as somebody who was a gigger, I was riding Lyft, that I'm sure that there are plenty of our people who are involved in that. And I would say this, that I don't think that we doubt our labor capacity. I think that what we lack is confidence. I mean, I don't think that we doubt the fact that we contribute to the economy in a great amount of way, because there was always some sort of strike that was going to be planned and blackout for one day, mind you, for something or another. And so I feel like African people in one way or another can understand like our labor and the ways that we contribute to the economy is significant. I think we doubt our confidence when doing things like strikes and stuff like that, because though they don't last long and maybe they don't have confidence that they can last without all of the things that they're used to. But in terms of our labor, I feel like when we look around at who drives the buses, who watches children, who works in retail, who works in the offices, who works in the fields, who works in everything, like the African people populate these subsectors of society that run society, like the workers, and African women are a large majority of that. And I would just say that we have to really start to internalize that what African internationalism tells us is that, the colonial capitalism was founded on the kidnap and exploitation and oppression of African people. And all we got to do is turn it around. If we recognize our own capacity and say that this is like we really upholding this thing through our labor, and we take our labor back, and more than that, defend our right to our own labor and be able to do what it is that we want to do with it, then the world would be flipped on its head. And I really appreciate like the chairman's analysis around white labor and the white labor force, the white workers and African workers, right? Like, saying that white workers get their ability to work from African workers who are the ones who are using their hands and their knees to, extract from the ground. And white workers can only strike on the pedestal of the workers in the field. And these two will never align. You will not find a white worker in Europe or the US aligning with the African worker on the continent, because they need this African worker to work. And so so I think that it's really important for African people to recognize that, you know, we we fund, we fuel everything, everything. Um, and I think that we just have to have more confidence in ourselves. And the only way we can have confidence is by being a part of a revolutionary organization or revolutionary projectors that can, constantly, allow you to see yourself as the center as opposed to some sort of like accessory, you know. Jamal, sorry, comrade.
Oh, no, no worries. Thank you, Comrade Perez. I appreciate that, and I want to salute the essay. I think it's really good and it's really informative. I think it's moving in that it does, I think, exactly what you're calling for in real simple terms, right? Calls for people to move. As an African man, I want to just ask, just put this out there, because a lot of us out there, when you look at social media, are necessarily not doing anything right or doing something wrong.
Mm.
Uh, how would you recommend that African men best unite with the struggle of African women to come into organization to take that confident position? Um, yeah, I'll just leave that right
Yeah,
there. Or
I think the best way to do that is just to come into revolutionary organization. you know,
what?
you know, unless you want to.
I can elaborate on that a little more,
Okay,
maybe.
let's do it.
Yeah. So, right. The process of decolonizing, I know for a lot of folks, a lot of African men is um, figuring out what to do with anger, right?
Mm,
And who not to use it on, right? Trying to combat the things that results in lateral violence,
mm,
right? And so a lot of reactionary behavior you'd see on the internet, which gets posed as, "Oh, this is what Black men do," is a
mm,
lot of stuff that's harmful, and
mhm,
talking crazy about Black women, talking crazy about our sisters, and so for African men out there who don't want to be that, right?
mm.
Like, what, how would you ask us to show up to be the best comrades we can?
Yeah, we're going to go into the informal sector in a minute, but the way that capitalism forms families is that women and children are the property of the man. The man is the owner, and women, their wives and their children are the property. And and for a lot of us, because we've been attacked for so long and we've been raised underneath colonialism, we don't know nothing else. This is our existence. We are the kind of human beings that only knows colonialism. We don't know what freedom is or feels like. And so the way that we understand family and our connection with one another is through this context of like property and oppression. And so a lot of us have had to do a lot of work to overturn that. And I think for African men, you must understand that African women are not your property. We are not your workers. We are you. We are experiencing the world the same as you. And so for you to then um say become the man of the household in some instances, if you are the household, right? And then require that African women submit in a way that doesn't submit because you are a man, even though they work just as hard as you, and even if they don't work as hard as you, but to submit is um bringing in hyper so hyper localizing colonialism in the home, right? Like that's the center at which African women can experience oppression directly. And we don't want African men to take on the um the characteristics of the colonizer. And so I would just say that part of decolonization is recognizing that you are not the owner, you are not the center, and that African women are not, and children are not the property or workers or laborers that help you have a better day or help you do X, Y, and Z. Is that we are supposed to see the future together. And I think what we both want and desire is a future where we are both free, where we are not replicating the institutions or the processes or the exploitation that we currently experience. And we have to stop that now, you know. So it's going to be deep work because some people, I know some brothers who accept this idea of I'm the man and I gotta, and that's also oppressive. Like that's a lot of pressure on y'all. Like, like to keep that, that's like, God damn, like release it, because I can see the tension that comes across the chest when that happens. Like, I have a brother who I feel like is dealing with that in a sort of kind of way, and it's super weird, and it doesn't seem like it's freeing. It seems like it contains anger and it contains a sort of control that maybe the outside world does not allow African men to have control over. So what they do is they control African women and men. African women and children in the home. And so I would just say that, one, you have to recognize that you do not want to be the colonizer in the household or in any situation with your sisters, with your moms, whoever, with any woman. You don't want to be a colonizer. You don't want to replicate oppression. And then when you recognize that in yourself, then you got to work on it. You got to consciously and actively. I had this saying that you have to kill the Becky for African women who deal with colonialism in themselves. Like kill. I don't know is it the Ken? I don't know what the male version of Becky is, but you have to constantly kill that guy, the colonizer inside yourself. You have to constantly work on it. So when you hear it and you feel it, and I think part of that is that when you feel the tension, you have to recognize why that tension is happening. When you're confronting a thing that makes you uncomfortable, you have to recognize, you can understand why that makes you uncomfortable. If it's not something strange, if it's not when we are dealing with something uncomfortable, we always have this tension that builds up in ourselves, not only just men, but people in general. And I think that you have to just be able to deal with it, breathe through it, and say and understand why it's happening. That was a long response. I hope I answered your question, but
Comrade Press, thank you. You did. I appreciate
thank you,
that.
Comrade. MQ.
This is a great article. Yeah, then one part that stuck out to me was that that African women vendors or on the continent have to register instead of or have to get registration or something, or a permit or something in order to
That's in the
vend.
U.S. That's in the U.S.
Oh, it's in the U.S. In the U.S. Oh, okay, yeah, and yeah, that's in the islands also, and then just so it's knowing that it's basically in the U.S. It's and then pretty much all over. It's with the capitals are trying um to draw in the labor of African women into the capitalist system, and so that was the part that jumped out at me. Ooh.
Thank you, Comrade. Erica?
Okay, hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, my laptop's kind of janky. I just wanted to say I really do appreciate your perspective and analysis and sort of composing of this image of what we're dealing with as a global conversation, not just limiting it to African women in America or anywhere else, but I think it just highlights the symmetry of where we are, no matter the regional specifics. For instance, you talked about microloans, and that made me think of you know how you could buy something and then you'll pay in 4 installments,
Klarna.
things like that. There's Klarna, yeah. It's just ridiculous. It's just you're buying groceries. You can literally do that for groceries. It's just insane to me. And I think it's really important that we do analyze the symmetry of our conditions specific to our African community, no matter where we are. And I think another thing that stood out to me from this was the sort of way that we're gaslit and told that we're lazy bums who are just good for nothing. which makes me think of the French president who basically like broke this down in a really amazing sort of quote. But it's like the whole time we're the only reason this country hasn't like caved into itself. It's like this sort of psychological terrorism of being told like you're good for it makes you work harder to prove that you're not like a parasite, even though you're the host of a parasite, which I thought was interesting. Okay. And then you also talked about the Uhuru Fund, which made me think about like the co-opting of our language and like how that is also this really weird psychological terrorism where we keep putting off the revolution because we think the very people making our problems are somehow going to be the ones to solve them. And this is the last thing. I'm really sorry. This is actually a question, but I just wanted to point those things out because those are things that stood out to me. I feel like since you got back you wrote this article before you went to Cuba, I'm pretty sure, to Cuba.
Yeah.
And so going to Cuba, I feel like probably was very interesting for you in terms of like around the conversation of quote unquote labor. And something I've been thinking about is like Karl Marx did not invent like sharing. And like even using this sort of like I want to go so far beyond anything we've been given, even the words because language dictates how we perceive things. And so even using terms like communism, which is only really focused on the economic portion of our issue. Our issue is not white people's issues. Their issue is like, their resolution would be communism. And I feel like the way the options we're often given is just like capitalism, colonial capitalism, or communism. That's all you get. But I feel like there's these other options that we're never talking about because we don't have the imagination to think about it. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were in terms of like culturally specific ideas around community, because it's not just that we're talking about an economic conversation of labor, whether it's African women's labor or our global community, which is like the floor of our oppression, but it's also also very important would be like a cultural conversation. And as other people have touched on is like the relationship dynamics between men, women, and our family, and then the broader community at large, how we're engaging with the environment, how do we consume, how do we view the world altogether? And I think those things aren't necessarily central to a communist solution. So I was curious what your thoughts were in terms of like, because I feel like the root of something is going to determine what type of fruit it bears. And if we're looking to build a communist world, that doesn't necessarily bear the fruit that I feel like we would want to bear. And I don't fucking want a fucking like statue of Marx anywhere in a fucking like I'm sorry, I just said fuck like 4 times. My bad.
I got you.
I'm so sorry. But yeah, so what are your thoughts on that in terms of like, because our power does come from being a community. And like when there's one Black person versus like 50 who are all focused on one thing, that's a very powerful thing. So like, how do we make like an Afrocentric worldview the nucleus of a successful labor-focused revolution? Uhuru.
I think we have to. So communalism, right? Like, so I feel like the African family, like you said, is the center of the economic. Is this economic center of our community? The family unit, like the family, like there's a reason why people come together, and they're supposed to work in a certain kind of way to develop their immediate family unit, but this contributes to the broader economics. And while I hear what you're saying about the terms that we're using, communism, but it's a word. It's communism, right? Like it's about communal living. But I also think that it does. If we look at, I was really like blown away by the book, how Europe developed Africa. I mean, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, and just the way that Rodney really looked at pre-colonial Africa and the way that we were arranging society before the attack on Africa came. And he was talking about trade routes. He was talking about education and learning and developing common language and all of these things. And the only reason that these do not exist is because of this parasite that happened, like this bomb that was dropped on Africa, this attack of Europe and Europeans and their parasitic violent ways that really blew up all of that. And African people then were forced into creating and producing and reproducing lives, producing and reproducing to uphold the lives of the colonizer. And I think it's really important too for African women when this happened is that yeah, pre-colonial Africa, African women and men, they had roles. I don't necessarily think they were gender roles, but yeah, African men, they did a certain thing. African women did a certain thing. It made sense because of the community, how things were arranged in society, that women would be the foragers, the house builders, the childcare. Men would go travel long distance and deal with larger animals and do, and take and kill and bring them back for the people. For the most part, African women maintained the village life and did all these things. And so after the bomb dropped, right? African women um, and the bomb dropped, and Europe came into Africa and many places that it colonized with this idea that women were subjugate to men, a property of men, that we were these roles became set. Number one, you're supposed to cook, clean, tend to the children. But in Africa, all the dressings that they gave to European women who weren't supposed to work, who wasn't supposed to labor and do all these other kind of things, that they were now forcing African women to leave the home base to work for them, to work in the field, in addition to African women coming back in and taking care of the home and doing all the other things. So I just want to say that at the point of this bomb, African women's labor doubled. Men's labor obviously doubled as well because they were no longer, well, let's say this, African women's labor doubled. Men's labor also increased, but differently. They were no longer going out to get meat for the family. They were solely responsible for developing and digging the dirt and doing all the things to produce for the colonizer. But African women then were now responsible for the home life and the labor associated with that, in addition to being the laborers that were also in the fields and doing all the things next to African men that produce. And that's not just on the African continent. That was anywhere that African people were spread, right? Like on the plantations and things like that. So I think that it's really important for us to think about our labor and how this colonial capitalist entity destroy it. And the only way that we can fight back from that is really center our labor, and not just in the economic sense. I feel like African people are are together all the time. Like I feel like we have a vibe, no matter where we're from, no matter how we try to fight it. African people can vibe off each other where we come from. I just know it. Like, I have my family's from the Caribbean, and I don't, like I got international Africans on different continents, but like even if without my family, like I know, like if I go somewhere, if I'm dropped off in the middle of somewhere, I'll be good. You know what I mean? Because I can just merge, and I think that is something that many other people do not have. I think that is currency in and of itself. And I think that what the destroying factor has been, what the demoralizing factor has been, what the deteriorating factor has been, is always colonialism. And we have to be able to use African internationalism to help people understand the centrality of themselves, but also like to simplify the question: how do we get free? How do we get liberated? Well, if one and one makes two, which means if Africa and African people is the basis and the foundation of capitalism because of the exploitation of our labor and our resources, then the only way to undo capitalism, which is to recapture the the labor and the means of production and all the things that capitalism took from us. So like it's a simple answer because African nationalism poses that question that we're able to answer. The thing is that now it's our responsibility as organizers to organize people to understand that too. So the blackouts, the so-called blackouts and boycotts won't just last for a day, that they will actually last for longer, but also tied to a revolutionary trajectory that gets us to a point where we can actually overturn the conditions that we currently live in. That's a long answer. But what I was trying to do was give like some context in terms of like what you were asking, but also like how this relationship between colonial capitalism um created like like what they call this the special oppression of African women inside of that, is essentially tied to our labor, to essentially tied to what we can produce and reproduce, and 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 which is tied also to the connection of central centrality of the family. Even if we ain't got kids, women are the culture bringers, the culture carriers, and they maintain it in the family unit. So these are all things that are destroyed because of colonial capitalism, and we just gotta do the 1 and 1 + 2 thing and help people understand that is a central piece that we have to organize and build and then launch it into the eye of the colonial capitalist so that we can destroy this what do you call it, the one-eyed beast with the tentacles and all that stuff. So yeah, that's a good book. Pre-Colonial Black Africa by Sheikh Anta Diop. That sounds like I also recommend. Anything that deals with the interconnectedness of African people pre-colonization, I think everybody should read. Everyone should read. All right, so we're gonna go back. I don't see Matsamela. Go ahead, Comrade, and then we can go right back into the reading.
Bro, I appreciate this. I just want to say, I really like Diop, and I like the way in which the party uses Diop, because there's been a way through which Diop and even John Henry Clark and others have been used really in an anti-communist way,
Mhm.
to push for. And whenever, that's why I do, because like communism, I get it. Like it's a word, but also like I don't know if Newton created the word gravity, but we associate gravity with Newton. But like people don't say we need another word besides gravity, because I just don't like saying that white man's word. You know what I mean? It's like it's not a spell. He ain't Beetlejuice. You know what I mean? So it's a trap, because sometimes I see, not you, Erica, but I've seen, throughout my political life, people say that, and then they'll turn around and have us working with the most backward segments of our community, and then on the low, working with the state and stuff.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Or saluting Africans who become leadership in the military and stuff. But I like how we use Diop, because the truth is Diop was bringing forth he was bringing forth a materialist understanding of the world and how it came into being. People have misused Diop, but that don't mean that we can reclaim Diop, because Diop was historical materialist. He was looking at how Marx explained the origins of the world and how we and placing an African understanding. But with the natural world around us and things like that, there's some limitations to it, but there's still some very good uses. So I like that book of Diop, and I like the way through which African internationalism allows for us to sort of reclaim these people, and put them to anti-colonial use. Diop, Clark, and so many other people.
I agree. We can't we should look at the words in the study and what they were attempting to do, or what they had this done successfully. And what I'm talking about is these um, archaeologists of Africanness, right? And they were able to dig deep and do the deep and profound research that many of us can't do right now because they, or haven't done. And I think we have to use them in our library and tools in our toolkit, some people might say, so that we can understand um, and dissect, what they were saying and can apply it just like we can apply any other author or any other scientist. We have to be able to apply our scientists to who did the work. So I appreciate your intervention there, Karma. I appreciate everybody's comments so far. So let's jump back into the piece and then we can round it out. Anybody willing to start here? And they can read this first to this section. I can't see any hands in the room, but Okay. I don't see any hands, but I'll go ahead and read. If somebody else wants to read after me, just let me know by putting your stuff in the chat. Put your hand in the chat. These companies and the trade institutions that back them set the economic terms for the commodity they can't live without while keeping the people who produce it in poverty. This is referring to the ending part. We're talking about Ghana and the cocoa producers. This is the formal economy in action. Structured dependency dressed up as trade. International partnerships and commodity boards work hand in hand with global finance institutions to ensure African labor enriches European profit margins, not African families. African women working in these industries are doubly exploited as laborers producing value and as caregivers managing the fallout of low wages, food insecurity, and community underdevelopment. When I was writing this and I came to this part, I was just like, yeah, it's not that we are the caregivers and we are the laborers that leave the house, but we also manage emotions and expectations when someone does not have good wages, when there is food insecurity, and when there's underdevelopment, and when there's mental health stuff. So there's another level, more than just a doubly exploited. There's a third level of exploitation and oppression that comes along with being the sort of like the maintainer of your family and the family unit. And I'm not saying that men don't do this, but I'm just saying that women have that emotional, as a woman myself, living with men, like you have this emotional responsibility or this emotional, they look to you as this emotional like leveler in your even in your own home to kind of manage like how people feel, how they come home, how they interact with you. You have to then be the responsible person to kind of help manage expectations in that way. It's super heavy. It's super heavy. The formal sector doesn't free us from the grip of capitalism. It simply puts a badge and price tag on the theft, making it appear legitimate. African mothers in the U.S., domestic labor in the colony. Inside the U.S., African people live under domestic colonialism. As part of the oppressed, colonized nation, African women and mothers, particularly, are overworked, underpaid, and criminalized. African mothers are raising families in food deserts, navigating low-wage jobs, fighting state violence, and are often the primary or sole income earners in our households. Black women in the U.S. make just 67 cents to every dollar paid to white men, but also make far less than white and Asian women who earn closer to 80 to 90 cents respectively. And Black women make even less as when they are mothers, heads of households, or caregivers. This is a calculated extraction. This economy does not survive despite African women's labor, but depends on it, thrives from it, and has structured itself around this theft. Does anybody? Oh, Amina, please read.
Uhuru. Communal labor, a double-edged sword. This communal labor of African women is a powerful expression of African life. But under colonialism, it has also become a source of exploitation. African women are often treated as liquid labor, workers who flow wherever needed, shifting between child rearing, farming, trade, caregiving, and household work with little rest or recognition. In some cases, women are even traded across households and regions through marriage arrangements that treat them as another pair of working hands. In other cases, the marriage of African women represents a loving and painful loss to families who depend on them not just economically, but as emotional and social anchors. While communal life has its strengths, colonialism has historically imposed external economic and cultural demands that trap women within old-fashioned roles. It has frozen organic African development, blocking the growth of infrastructure, technology, and leisure systems that could free up society from only doing the work required to maintain day-to-day survival. In doing so, it has locked African women into roles that once reflected collective necessity, but now operate under conditions of crisis and compulsion. What was once balanced and reciprocal has been distorted into duty and debt. Women must do it all the time. True liberation requires reclaiming communalism. It means freeing women from the expectation of total sacrifice and creating the conditions where all sectors of society, not just women, can participate in building, healing, imagining, and thriving beyond survival.
Thank you, Comrade.
Thank
I
you.
could have Coco pick up here. Thank you so much.
Liberation and inclusion. The struggle is not for inclusion into the colonial economy. It is for the total transformation of it. African women must not be reduced to micro enterprises and state managed empowerment. We must fight to build independent, liberated economic systems controlled by African people for African people. Organizations like the African
Nope, you skipped
National
the part.
Women's
You
Organization,
skipped the part.
ANWO,
You
I'm
skipped.
sorry, embedded, okay, I don't know why mine is shorter. Okay. Embedded in our struggle for freedom and self-determination is the demand for reparations for the historic and ongoing theft of Africa's resources, which includes the labor and the value thereof produced by African women globally. Organizations like the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, exist because we understand that true liberation comes through organized resistance and political power. Our work to build the economic institutions such as Decolonize, Hair and Body, One Africa, One Nation, Farmers Market in North St. Louis, and participation in creating liberated territories with the ANWO Liberation Center is an act of resistance, a rejection of colonial dependency, and a step toward economic self-reliance. The colonial world has always feared the organized power of African women. That's why our labor is controlled, surveyed, and exploited. But when we are organized, conscious, and united, we are unstoppable. True transformation will not come from shifting African women from informal to formal work, but from dismantling the entire colonial economy that exploits us in all sectors. There's no such thing as an empowerment without power. And there's no power without organization.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Thank you, comrade. So that's the end of the piece, comrades. And I'm gonna stop share for right now. Unless there's some place that we want to go to. But where did we start off again? Okay, here. Yeah, in this section I wanted to do this article where we talk about formal and informal economy because again, this idea of saying that they have to protect women, African women, particularly on the African continent and in other places as well, maybe like the Caribbean or South America or stuff like that. They want to protect women from exploitation and yeah, they want to protect women from exploitation and potential violence. And the way to do that is by bringing them into the formal economy. So the vendors of the road who sell peanuts and all these other kinds of things, items that they make, things that they grow, are in danger of being exploited and not being protected. For example, if they get their stuff stolen, or if they don't have a license or things like that, and they don't get the benefit of equal opportunity laws because they're not seen as a formal worker and things that the state would provide as a method of protection. But that also comes with taxation, that also comes with restrictions, that also comes with limitations, that also comes with removing agency from African women who are participating. So yes, it can be a site of hyper exploitation, but it also has been a site where African women commune with one another. They solve problems, they work together. The markets aren't filled with men, they're filled with women. Like it's market women, like who are, coming collecting the fishes and making deals, and the commerce of an entire country, whether it's even as informal sector, has been documented as they are contributing to that in one way or another. And I find it completely disgusting, right? Like it's a crime to think that African people will see the efforts of a particular state that says that we're trying to increase the equity of women, so we want them to become more engulfed in capitalism. Oh, I just want to rip my whole eyeballs out when I see shit like that. Like it just becomes enraging because people don't know how to interpret that, right? They're like, oh, that's great. We all want the equity of women. So why can't we be for this thing that supposedly is going to bring equity to women? But we are smarter than that, aren't we, comrades? Like we know that's capitalism. It's a capitalist economy. It's all that we know. And we know that capitalism is not good. And and the more people that they are recruiting or bringing into capitalist economy, the more power and control that they have over these people. So African women present an opportunity, right, and a challenge, because more of them are in the informal sector, outside of the scope of control of capitalist economic systems, and they are creating and doing what they need to do in order to make life manageable for themselves. But because they aren't controlled by capitalism, they're able to build, organize, and make their own policies. Most of y'all should know about Susu, or what my grandma called Padna, which is mostly like women who created a system of saving money and to get something, right? So a whole bunch of people come together collectively, they put money in a pot, and then they go around in a circle, and at some point during the circle, everybody gets a payout from this pot. Like that was created by African people. And African women, I would imagine, because I've never seen African men participate in Padna. And since, my grandma did it, and it's always like women who are creating these systems that we can use to enhance and it impacts the entire community. So African women, when we talk about the revolutionary capacity of African women, that African women do organize to protect themselves. They don't need the state. There are women's groups all throughout the African world. There are women's trade groups. There's women's groups all throughout the world that operate to protect themselves and to protect each other. And that is a building ground that we need to study, as opposed to trying to dismantle it by saying that that it doesn't function correctly. And capitalism only wants you to function in a way that capitalism can control. So anyway, I just wanted to pull that out in the comparison between the informal and formal sector more so, and in the ways that African women participate in the informal sector more so than the formal. And that though African women might come into the formal sector, that's a legitimate, legalized way to exploit women as well. Because even when you come in, you making 60 cents on the dollar of a white man, right? And that's only in comparison to a white man. We're not even comparing it to African men, which are making less than white women and Asian women in the US anyways, right? So so we have to look at the way that colonial capitalism begins to talk about our conditions, but also study how we already solve these problems for ourselves and expand upon that. That goes back to what Comrade Erica was talking about. We already have these tools that we've learned, but we have been told, just like with religion and with other kinds of things that are indigenous and traditional to African people, that these things are old-fashioned, that they are dysfunctional, that they are not proper or modern. when in reality they solved a problem. So I'm a pause there because I want to hear what y'all think. And yeah, Uhuru comrades. Am I still sharing my screen? Okay. Oh, MQ comrade, go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, you were talking about the difference between the formal sector and the formal sector of the economy. It's like really touched me because when my mom was a kid, she sold corn on the bus, and that wasn't regulated or permitted or anything. It's like, and now, yeah, it's like I think it was a decade or so ago, and then suddenly it's like vendors need to have permits. It's like what the. Yeah, and this is happening, as I said, and you said it's happening in the U.S. and it's happening in the islands too, and yeah. So it just like, yeah, it's like, and now I understand. Okay, that's why they need the permits, is like because it's bringing African women into the formal economy and the taxation, and then it can be regulated and surveyed and everything like that. So now I understand why. So yeah,
It's outside of our control too. Because like we might have different ways that we will regulate things ourselves, right? And I just remember when I was younger and I lived in New York, my mother used to try to take us to this African market in Harlem that was there for a number of years. And all of a sudden it was gone. Black people coming together for commerce, and then they wiped it out. So they couldn't vend anymore, and they had to have licenses, and they couldn't come together. Like, it was in a contained area, but they wiped it out. In DC, when I first moved down here, there were different little pop-up markets throughout DC, where African people would come together, the black markets that African people would come together and vend and sell their stuff. And they stopped doing that. They made it illegal. They specifically made it illegal for us to have these markets. You cannot have them. And of course, to be a vendor on the street, you gotta have some sort of license to sell things that you might have created on your own. And the reason that they say that is because they say that they wanna prohibit blight and people doing it. They want to make it look nice for people. They don't want vendors all over the place hassling folks and stuff like that. But it really is to, one, if you don't get a license, then they are getting rid of an alternative way for you to make money. If you do get a license, then they can exploit the fact that you're going to get this alternative way of getting money. And the thing too is, like, when I went to Cuba, and I thought that there were vendors on the street and things like that, but there was also like there's no taxation on the people. There's no taxes, right? And then if you participate in vending, like, all of that is your money, like, if you're able to make money that way. And so when you think about, I mean, they are definitely not the pinnacle, but I think they have been working toward this for longer than many other places in the world have been working toward an economy that doesn't exploit and oppresses people. But I think that it's really important for us to see, like, it's not just a separate thing, a separate attack. These are all attacks that kind of form together. They get rid of your economic means. They make things harder for you. They tell you that you got to go get welfare. These are the things that we have to help you supplement your income, and then they control you in that way. Just like, if you think about it in the macro term, right? So an African country is struggling, and they need money. They borrow from the IMF. IMF says, "Sure, I'll give you money," and then they heavily charge interest, and you never get out of debt from them. This is how you should think about the smaller micro things that is happening in your lives too. You never get out of debt. They're always going to control you with that. Jamal.
Oh, Comrade Perez, other side of that, right, is not only do they make it illegal for us to have our own informal markets, but then what do? They have farmers markets, and they tell
Yes.
you how that's the pinnacle of what small communities are supposed to look like, and isn't it so great? So who can afford these permits, right? Who is the capital to even get involved in the first place, right? So when, whereas you had a lot of these informal markets before, I don't know, if y'all been to a farmer's market wherever you are, maybe it's different, but it's a lot of white folks who are running these
Mhm.
stands. A lot of white folks who have the produce. I bet you they're not the ones picking the produce though. And
Right.
to your point about the IMF, not only do they come in and they, take massive amounts of loans, but they also coerce these governments into changing their policies and taking away any type of state support
Mm.
for health, any kind of state regulation of businesses, benefits, things like that. They make you quote unquote liberalize your economy, right? Bring you into the neoliberal economy, colonial capitalist economy, and there goes your sovereignty.
Yeah.
People talk about how colonialism's over. You see writers, um, just real goofballs with PhDs who talk about post-colonial. What are you talking about? If if the United States tomorrow decides, oh, we're gonna go march in your country again, they're doing the same colonialism, right? Did
Right.
they not? It's just it, neocolonialism is the stage, right? It's the tactic,
Mm.
but it is still the same old colonial capitalism. Oh,
Yeah. Uhuru. When I came out of high school, I was like, I'm gonna be a stockbroker, y'all. I was about to be up in there. I was fascinated by the stock market and marketing and all of those movement of money. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a stockbroker. I wanted to be a medical technologist up until the point that I took economy in my 12th grade year in high school. So I left high school thinking I'm going to be in this money game, not because I wanted to make money, but because I wanted to understand economy more, right? So I went to school and I was doing micro and macro economics, and I had no political education whatsoever. No, none. I wasn't politicized at all. I was just black, 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 black. And they're going through supply demand. They're talking about creating scarcity, and they're basically saying that the market is swayed by, I think, Green, I forget the name of the person that is supposed to tell you projections for the next year and how things should flow. So when this person says, oh, the market's going to be bad in this area, this area, and this area, and then companies move their money so that they won't be impacted. So that just creates the economy that's going to be bad. So I was just like, this is a figment of imagination. This economy, this capitalist, I didn't call it capitalism, but economics was a figment of people's imagination. It's not real. Is based on who owns the means of production. This is how I understand it now. Who owns the means of production, who controls the means of production that controls everything in the world, right? So it's a figment. Like people can just press a button and shift the entire economy. So I was in my adult life, I've been so like focused on how do we learn economy outside of the capitalist construct. Like, how do we become creators of an economic system, um, an economic way of contributing to one another, than other than what we were taught? Because this capitalist economic thing is is crazy. And one of the things that I wrote another article called around tariffs, and the thing too is that when they control your economics, right? When they tell you to take a microloan, when they tell you to take the IMF loan, they control your economics, they control how you trade. So all of a sudden, the thing that you were exporting and you were bringing money into your country so that you can deal with your people and your things now is being limited for export so that you have to import something else. Y'all, like, I need to look at these. Like, if you don't, like, I mean, I started looking at it, I was like, wow, this is crazy wild. And people are baffled as to why people are struggling economically, don't have economic power or self-determination, because the imperialism has a strategy, is a multi-pronged strategy of how to ruin nations and how to keep themselves in power. And most of that is like impoverishing people. It's about keeping people um uh and the most desperate of those people under wraps. So the women creating violence, like these are all ingredients for controlling the population. These are all ingredients for ensuring that people are desperate enough to fall into line of the capitalist economic system. And when they specifically, I mean, if you look at the the financial plans and stuff that they have launched out, and it's mostly out in the world from the US, right? Like they usually don't have schemes to that they've publicized around getting Black women in the United States to come into some formal sort of economy. It's always launched out into the world. And if you look at them, they're always talking about equity and that everywhere else in the world does not have the equity that the United States has. And so we got to give them this. And they dump a whole bunch of money into some sort of fund or with some sort of government and never solve the problem. And it's a ploy, and it's a way for neocolonialism also to get resources, right? Like, because they never solve the problem of women. I reject the fact that African women particularly are um uh used as the scapegoat for a lot of things, for military intervention, for billions of dollars in funding to the African continent that never gets used to solve any problems, when the reality is that we can solve these problems ourselves. Marcelo, you came on screen, so I'm gonna allow you to speak. Not allow you, but you have the floor, Carmen.
Oh no, I'm not trying to speak. I'm just on
Oh,
screen.
okay, cool. Yes, and anybody else who wants to be on screen, you can be on screen. This is the moment, like it's fine. Um, so Jamal, did you have your hand up? Did you have something else to say?
Oh, Cameron, I forgot to lower it.
Okay, no problem. Asma, you want to mention what you put in the chat? Oh, I can Sayero.
I
I want to say that it's been a very dynamic course this evening, but it really shows in the way you broke it down. I'm right yesterday. It shows how they came into the Black community, but we once were prosperous and then we had businesses, and they took over the businesses, locked us out of doing any business, put us into criminal aspects of doing business, and they again criminalized us, victimized us. As you said, we can't do our own markets. We have to go to the white folks' farmers market. This is universal. And it's so sad because here it is. They said it, as you stated, this is the land of opportunity. Yet and still, we attempt opportunities, but we're always crippled. Legs are always broken based on some kind of verification, certification, some kind of licensing, those types of things that really don't allow for communities to thrive. It's no different than what we're watching down in St. Louis, where they're not releasing any funds in the Black community, and the African People's Socialist Party is taking the charge to help rebuild the institution of housing. So it really shows me what you're saying. We are really our own liberators. And the fact is, as long as we want to look to them for any leeway or any lead to our freedom, we're looking the wrong way. And I really want to say this is a program I appreciate.
Thank you. And just before you go, I just want to say, like it's about economic starvation. It's a tactic. It's economic starvation. And then it's a control of your economics. So they push you into these low wage jobs. You have to manage the fallout from whatever colonialism is happening, you know, women are managing this, men are managing it too. And in addition to that, any opportunities that we build for ourselves becomes filled with red tape. In the article, I put in an example around hair braiders. I was a few years ago, we were trying to come together and make a union for hair braiders. It still can be a union for hair braiders, but at the time, there was more states who were saying that in order for one to get a braiding license in many states, not all of them, some states had hard, some women had fought hard in states like Texas and some other states in New York and in DC, which is not a state, to make sure that there was no limitation, right? But there were some states that were saying that you cannot become a business and braid hair in this state unless you go through cosmetology school. The cosmetology school costs thousands of dollars. And why would I need to go to cosmetology school when I already know how to braid hair? And, you know, and so when you go through this, they don't even teach you what you need to know. You're going through this for the motions, you're being extorted from your money. And then you come in, and the flip side, you get your cosmetology license, you get your and then you got to get your license from the state to do business. So you've already been out thousands of dollars. And so, and when the other states that have already achieved this, right? So the women who have fought for it have said that we're not altering or using chemicals, so why we have to go through this school? And so that's not a requirement, but the licensing is still a requirement if you're going to do hair. So whereas before, outside of that, then we have our opportunities to, like, you know, it's like the pre-colonial Africa sort of dynamic where outside of this foreign intervention, that we will build systems that regulate ourselves. Right? Like those are more indigenous, intrinsic, and reliable and more applicable to what we're trying to do. But we can't do that in a system that not only prevents us from doing that, but copies what we do and then uses it as an opportunity for themselves to make money. So yeah, I'm sorry, Masamela, please go ahead and I just wanted to add that.
Oh no, that's to me, all this really speaks towards, you know, the basis of even these studies, which is the RNDP, the Revolutionary National Democratic Program. I mean, I think about the way through which, you know, when it's useful, you know, they attack African cultural practices. You know, in New York City, the way through which they started attacking the people who practice Yoruba and things like that. We know that this is not a religious organization, but we also know that the core question and all that isn't hair braiding. It's not susu or anything like that. It's power. It's a question of power and who has so anything that same thing, you know, you can't sacrifice a goat or something like that, but so there's all these rules that were made to target Africans, but of course if you over in Bensonhurst and doing whatever they do when it's time to circumcise little boys, that's fine, you know. So the question is about state power, about African independence and things like that. My comment in the chat was just in line with what you were talking about, how you became interested in economics and that the only vessel seemed to be given to African people is, you know, go to school of econ or something. I think that's the importance of African internationalism and our study of political economy. I mean, you talk about stolen labor, and I thought about Chairman's book, Stolen Black Labor, and the way through which Chairman put forward the very first calculation of African labor that was stolen and what was owed to African people. So there we see the revolutionary application of those concepts. You know, I think about Garvey, how Garvey took those things away from the bourgeoisie and placed the economy into the hands of the African working class. And let's be clear, I mean, I'm not suggesting that simply black capitalism is what. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying, if you take the economy, place the economy in the hands of the African working class, that's the first step towards communism and socialism. Because Garvey fought with white communists here in the U.S. and because he fought with white communists, people will sit back and say Garvey was an anti-communist, and then people say it was a fascist, which is a bunch of nonsense. But at the same time, he fought white communists here. He supported the Bolshevik Revolution. He supported the unity of Irish and African workers in the UK. But the thing is, they wanted to control African labor.
Right.
You know, he said he's got one thing where he says, you know, the same people that didn't want you in their unions did last year. Now they want you to join their communist organization. And it's funny because I mean Garvey was like a funny dude. So he says that's because when the bosses start firing people for being communists, they're gonna fire the black people first. So he said, no, don't join their organizations. But then he has this organization and places the African working class in control, and he sets a maximum income of I forget. Jalali's on the call. He knows what the number was, but Garvey set a cap. He said no human should be able to earn more than this much, and things like that. But my whole point is that like when you organizing people, and a lot of people here are students or move through campuses, the truth is that sometimes you organize these students who end up on the side of campus that we think is the black studies and all that other stuff, but all them kids want to be intellectuals and sit not get their hands dirty. But then you go and ask somebody, hey man, why you an engineer? The very first thing is they say, I know I need to make money.
That's it.
They say, I know I need to make money. And that's not revolutionary class consciousness, but it is a sort of understanding of the material world around them. So I think that like, you saying, hey, I was interested in economics because something had to explain the world I lived in. That reminded me of myself too, because, I always thought I was going to work at the shipyards in Long Beach. Everybody else in my family had worked at the shipyards. I was supposed to work at the shipyards. But then when I was in 10th grade, like literally within 6 months, they closed down the shipyards. And I got good at football. So it was like, oh, I guess I'm going to go to college, but I remember even in high school searching for understanding on like why, I remember I came across some stuff and it wasn't revolutionary, but it offered a sort of materialist explanation for deindustrialization and things like that. It was a sort of a socialist or a socialist explanation for the economic shifts, and that started my drift towards understanding the importance of socialism and communism and stuff. So I just wanted to just underscore the importance of hey, I was always interested in economics, even though I thought maybe I'd be on Wall Street or whatever it is, but it's not like some, Gordon Gecko or some nonsense.
I've always approached college and I have several degrees. They're all associates. I've always approached college as a means to help me like to deal with a practical problem. I go there. I went to college to learn how to do website, even though I can do that on my own, to learn how to do websites and understand coding. I went to school to learn how to make clothes and be my own entrepreneur. I went to school to understand economics and how to explain this thing that was happening in the world. And I'm always trying to explain the world and to utilize a tool so that it could be practically applied. And that's how I saw economics. And when I saw that it could not be it couldn't be practically applied, that I will be a tool. And again, I had no political education. I will be a tool to help rich people make more money. I was like so disgusted by it. But Erica, you've had your hand up for a while, so please comment. And then MQ.
Uhuru. No, it's cool. I appreciate you like kind of mapping the trajectory of who you were and who you've become and like how that forecasts who you will become. And I think it kind of speaks to the like evolution that we're all kind of on in this sort of political journey. Um, and I think something that keeps coming, because my mind is like, those things that they would have you do when you were growing up, where you would like you have all these dots and they have numbers by them, and you have to draw one line dot to the next, and then it's like this picture. My mind kind of works like that in a lot of different ways. And so when you guys were talking about like farmers markets, it kind of felt like the same sort of thing of like communism in a sense of like, white people tend to just like name like okay, so it's like they'll basically say something is like old fashioned or dysfunctional or like primitive, but until like a white person comes along with the same idea just under their name. So it's kind of the same thing of like farmers markets. It's like, well, we were kind of already had something like this going on, or then all of these things kind of become like luxuries and put behind a paywall. And so like actual food that is not like GMO foods are like gate kept. You know how if you go to Harlem now, they'll be like they have like shampoos in a case and you have to like get someone to come because like
They
people
locked it up like behind the CBS class. Yeah.
literally yeah, and like so it's the same thing with like organic foods now, except for it's not like a cage, it's like a $5 apple or whatever. And sort of just kind of speaking again to like the Uhuru Fund, and it being like this co-opting of
Yeah.
ideas and taking it and putting it in their name, but like using their language.
Mhm.
And I don't know, like I feel like my mind can't get beyond this idea of like divesting everything from anything they've given us because it's all been poison. And how do we, because what you've just described in a lot of ways is like us trying to sustain ourselves in this current system while we're taking it apart, which
Mhm.
is very difficult to do because you're working not just short
Yeah.
term, but long term. Or like, I guess I don't know, it's like linear or whatever. Like you're working on different levels at the same time because you still have to eat right now. But
Mhm.
like in 5 years from now, we're working so that 7 generations from now, our people are totally free and don't even have any like semblance of these things. So I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts are in terms of like, how do we divest from Eurocentric pathologies and like viewpoints while we're still having to engage in this sort of sandbox? How do we take apart a machine that we have to, that by surviving in it, we keep it going? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
I'll tell you what I've done and what I continue to do. I think people have to join a revolutionary organization, point blank period. You cannot do this as an individual. Like and not everybody is going to do that. But this study is a part of the revolutionary organization seeping out into the world. And I say that because um, you have to be held accountable to the decolonial process. You can't just do it because you just had a good weekend and you wanted to go out, roll out into the woods and roll around with the flowers and ground with the land. Like you, like you need you need to have be engaged in the process of overturning those those things that have oppressed us. And you have to be engaged with individuals who are also trying to do that because they're going to, if we're doing it right, right, we're going to be engaged in the process of criticism and self-criticism. We're going to be a process of dealing with liberalism, overturning liberalism. And all of these things are decolonial processes that must happen. Struggle has to happen in order to break away from the old ways of behaving and dealing with issues like it is. So that's the quickest way that I know how to deal with that. Because if you're doing it by yourself, you're not being accountable to yourself. And I don't know how an individual can be out in the world and decolonizing. I just don't. I mean, because it's subjective, right? It's not held to any revolutionary principles. It doesn't there's no struggle, there's nothing. So I could be like, I could decolonize in any way that I want to, but the reality is that if you're part of a revolutionary trajectory, that's particularly the African internationalist revolutionary trajectory that says we have to destroy the colonial mode of production, and like everything that every person involved in that process is doing is headed to that aim, and what you're doing is not destroying the colonial mode of production because you're engaging in colonial modes of production, right? Like you're engaging in colonial ways of being, then we're not going to get there, right? Like, so we have to be involved and hold ourselves accountable to the process of criticism and self-criticism and destroying liberalism. that has to happen. Struggle has to happen inside with people who are decolonizing themselves. So that's the yeah, that's what I can contribute. MQ, and then we can start to wrap it up. Thank you, comrade.
Well, yeah, when you're talking about the the cosmetology school, and then for African women who already know how to do hair, and then and I was thinking about like basically the only like non-mental skill that I have is massage, but then and of course then you have to in Florida, then you have to go to school for it, and then the license fees and all that, and then it's like and even if I were to do that, then that would just be it's like giving it's like yeah would be feeding the colonial system, and then as opposed to working to overturn that system.
Girl, I just want to say thank you for your service. I adore masseuses. They're like they do God's like if y'all believe in God, they do God's work. Like somebody puts hands on you and massages your your body, and that's amazing stuff, right? So thank you for your service, MQ. But I understand exactly what you're saying, um, and the colonialism will say to you that we're trying to protect you from the predators, or we're trying to make sure that the people who are undergoing this licensing is up and up. But the reality is that people who get licenses can still be predators. You know what I mean? So these pseudo sort of protections that don't really exist, that the state says that they're offering, are not protections at all. It's just a way for them to, get you in, exploit you, and then, they have a day off. You know what I mean? So like, so so that yeah, I wanted to just say that. But I just want to thank everybody for participating in this PE. We got a couple of announcements and then we can head out. So just thank you. I want to just appreciate Masamela for allowing Anwo to take over one of the R&DP studies for the month, and we'll be doing them monthly as a part of the R&DP series. That Masamela might want to change the name, but I'm okay with it. I think this is a part of, the struggle that we got to make in terms of the Revolutionary National Democratic Program. So in June, we're going to do one on African women in the colonial state. We're going to do a lot more PE in the month of June to look at the kidnapping and just go deep into how that is intrinsic in the colonial capitalist system. And in July, we're going to do like a organizational history around why African women have organized, past and present. And then in August, we're going to talk about sexual violence and rape, and not just as rape as from one person to another, but the colonial rape, right, and how that triggers all the other kinds of sexual violence that happens. So stay tuned for those. And some final announcements is that we wanted to bring people's attention to the fact that we talked about St. Louis a few times here in the study, but the north side of St. Louis, where our movement is headquarters, has experienced a devastating tornado, and they are not talking about that on the news. I don't look at the news often, but I did look at the news today, and there was talking about tornado somewhere else in the world, in the U.S., but not what has happened to the north side of St. Louis and the devastation that it has caused. People have been out of power, it's just getting on. Trees have been down, roofs have been taken off, properties have been destroyed, livelihoods have been usurped from this tornado. And the state's response is similar to what we saw in Katrina, where they didn't really have a response, that they knew tornadoes would happen, they knew that it was going to come, but there was no provisions that would be ready and able to help the people on the north side of St. Louis. So the community community has shown up for themselves, as we always do, and continue to show up for ourselves as we continue to work through the devastation of this tornado. And when we say devastation, even though these houses are not splintered on the ground because they're brick houses, the devastation is there. So these are some of the pictures that our comrades took on the ground in St. Louis after the tornado. And there was also a press conference that was done on Wednesday to outline the seriousness of it. And there's a call. I won't play it. I'm just gonna. There is a call to participate in the volunteer efforts in St. Louis and to get involved and make donations to our efforts as well. Just go to Black Power Blueprint. And Impedum is also involved in that as well. So Impedum is having an open meeting on June 1. So that's this coming weekend at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 Central, 10 a.m. Pacific, and all the other times that you see there that are international. And it's open to all our comrades, members, and volunteers. You get to meet the International Executive Committee, learn about the work that they're doing internationally. We are doing internationally because I'm also a member of Impedum, and join the summer membership drive that they're also launching. And what was having our all members meeting is going to be on June 7th, next weekend at 5 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to be recorded for our comrades who are international. So please, you can go online and find out more details about that by going to amwohuru.org. Just go to the events tab, and then you'll see all the events that we have listed. You can register for that if you are a member of the organization. We are focused primarily on membership for this first meeting because we want to make sure that we can organize our folks for a campaign launch to do our postering, which we'll talk about in just a second. On June 8th, we'll have a Harriet's Daughters book club. So this study is a part of our Harriet's Daughters book club study group series. As you can see, the full title on the actual image. So Comrade Coco, who is on this call, will be leading the Harriet's Daughters book club. And the book that we're highlighting is We Do This Till We Free Us by Miriam Kaba. And that's going to be from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern. For stolen, so as most of you may already know, African National Women's Organization is a part of the Black Mothers March Steering Committee. I'm the chair. We have our co-chair is Comrade Amanda Wallace of Operation Stop CPS, and there's a number of other organizations who are involved in that process. June is Stolen Children's Month. Even if you don't belong to an organization and you want to find out more about what you can do to contribute to Stolen Children's Month, we've designated that month. We've named it. We've taken it back and we called it Children because it was Reunification Month, and we said it's Stolen Children's Month. And this is going to focus not only on the state-sponsored kidnapping of African children through the CPS system, but it also talks about immigration, prisons, and the many different ways in which our children are kidnapped and taken from us. So go to stolenchildrensmonth.com. There are webinars and activities that are being planned throughout the month of June. There's actually going to be vigils in different cities at the close of June to kind of close out the month. So you can sign up to participate in any of those activities as an individual, and AMWO is also going to be participating in those activities as well. So leading into that, our Arrest CPS campaign is a part of the work to expose the parasitic nature of the family policing system. And this is a statistic that was taken from Maryland. 54.5% of all children in the custody of Maryland CPS were Black, despite being, I think, like 32% of the population of children in the state. That's an overwhelming number in the whole state of Maryland. So, we know that this is a counterinsurgency attack that has been decimating our families for decades. So we have gotten a grant to put up posters to politically educate our community. The posters are also being used as a way to form local Arrest CPS committees on the ground. And we have 5 cities designated, but if you want to participate in some way, put up a poster in your city, get at me and we see what we can possibly do. But we've chosen the cities as Washington, D.C., San Diego, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and Brooklyn, New York, based on our membership. But again, if you're interested and open to putting up posters in your city, just let me know. We can get you some out to where you are. And then the One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market will launch for our 2025 season on June 21. We are looking for volunteers. We are looking for people who want to vend. We are looking for people to support the market, share out the information about the market. We had a little bit of a setback because of the tornado, and the park that we use had a lot of downed trees. So we're trying to figure out if we're going to continue to have it in the park or do it in another location near the park on the street, which is not impacted by the parks. So we'll figure that out. But either way, we're going to have our market on June 21st in St. Louis. Please go to oneafricamarket.com to find out more information about how you can volunteer, how you can vend, and also how you can support. Farmers are free to vend. So we plan to have some good produce to support the community. And then also informational vendors are also free to vend. Um, and then finally, we call on African women to become members of the African National Women's Organization. Make African National Women's Organization your political home. We talk a lot about the issue of African women's labor, which is really entrenched in class too, this discussion that kind of comes out between the informal sector, and really the political education that comes from that analysis is rooted in African internationalism, and you're only going to get that in the African National Women's Organization. So we are calling on African women to become members of this organization. And what you get through your membership is you get a warm and fuzzy feeling. You get more than that. You get to be linked to International Network of African Women. You get liberation news and information, opportunities to engage in actions and events and product discounts, because we do offer product discounts if you're a member to AMWO and Decolonize. So join us. And our donors also get a product discount from time to time because they've been supporting the organization. So if you can't become a member because you aren't an African woman, definitely become a sustaining donor to AMWO. So close is that we're going to be doing I forgot to change that out, but we're going to be doing these programs once a month on a Thursday at 8. So the third Thursday of every month, we'll be doing RNDP. And so we just use the same way that you registered for all of your RNDPs. We're going to stay in that format. And then we just also want to thank you for allowing me to take over, President Masamela and the comrades, for your participation and engagement in this discussion. I think that it's really important for us to start looking at, I think for African women, it's not enough to be talked about in terms of gender, but talked about in terms of labor and contributions to society, which is more than just our gender and our ability to reproduce human beings. It's about that's practical, but it's tied to political economics. It's tied to the revolutionary overthrow of colonial capitalism. It's more than just this gender issue, and African internationalism allows us to expand our brains beyond what mainstream women's organizing traps us into, and it allows us to see ourselves as a full human being that is capable of changing the world, and the many ways that we contribute to that change in the world beyond just our biological capacity, but as full human beings who have contributed so much to our communities and have been exploited because of the range of things that we are able to contribute. So I hope that you enjoy this study that's focused on African women, but it also talked about the broader economics of African people. And I look forward to more discussions around our experience and how we can be seen as full human beings that are contributing to the fullness of the African Revolution. So thank you so much, comrades, for participating. And thank you for having me, comrades. Uhuru.
Uhuru.